Close your eyes and imagine waking up in the year 1348. There is no shower waiting for you, no toothbrush, no toilet paper. No toothbrush, no toilet paper. The air around you smells of smoke, sweat, animals, and something far worse. Outside your door, the streets are filled with mud and human waste. Inside your home, fleas hide in your bed, and somewhere in the distance, church bells are ringing, not for celebration, but for the dead. This is not fiction. This is real life in the Middle Ages. And what you're about to discover will completely change the way you see history, and the way you appreciate the modern world. Will explain everything in this video, step by step. Don't skip it. Close your eyes for a moment and step into the year 1348. The air is thick, not just with fear, but with smell. There are no showers, no running water, no toilet paper, no deodorant, no disinfectant wipes, no plumbing humming behind the walls. What you breathe is wood smoke, sweat soaked into wool, damp straw, animal dung, and the sour tang of bodies that have not been washed in weeks, sometimes months. This is life in the Middle Ages. And in 1348, as the Black Death begins its merciless march across Europe, the absence of sanitation is not merely uncomfortable, it is deadly. Imagine waking before dawn on a winter morning at a small English village. The floor beneath you is packed earth. You have slept on a sack stuffed with straw, crawling with fleas. Those fleas, so small you barely notice them, carry the bacteria that will soon change the course of history. There is no bathroom to stumble into, no sink to turn. If your cottage is modest, you may have a wooden bucket in the corner, the night soil bucket. If you are fortunate enough to live in a town, you might share a communal latrine, a wooden structure perched above a cesspit. Waste drops into a shallow trench below, where it festers until someone is paid, if anyone is paid, to shovel it out. More often than not, the contents are thrown directly into the street. Gardes, lo. They shout in parts of medieval France. Watch out for the water. A warning that what is about to splash down from an upper window is not water at all. The streets are not paved with cobblestone dreams. They are layered with mud, manure, rotting food, and human waste. Pigs wander freely, rooting through garbage. Chickens scatter, dogs fight over scraps. The boundary between household and farmyard barely exists. And yet this is not a world without dignity. It is a world of necessity. Water must be drawn by hand from a well or carried from a stream. Heating it requires firewood, time, and labor. A full bath is not a daily ritual. It is an event. For many peasants, washing consists of wiping the face and hands with a damp cloth. Clothing, heavy wool garments, absorb sweat and grease. Undergarments, when owned at all, are changed infrequently. Soap exists, but it is coarse, harsh, and precious. Even kings and queens do not live as we might imagine. In castles, there are garderobes, stone shafts built into outer walls. Waste falls down into a moat or pit below. The draft of cold air rising through the shaft makes the chamber frigid in winter. Privacy is minimal. Hygiene is relative. Toilet paper, it does not exist. People use rags, moss, leaves, handfuls of straw, in some places smooth stones, in wealthier households, scraps of cloth that will later be washed and reused. And hands are rarely washed with soap. We must resist the temptation to judge. The people of the 14th century are not ignorant. They are bound by the limits of their time. The germ theory of disease lies 5 centuries in the future. The invisible world of bacteria and viruses is beyond imagination. Illness is explained through imbalances of humors, through miasma, the belief that foul smells themselves cause disease, or through divine punishment. When plague arrives in 1348, it seems to confirm every fear. The disease moves with terrifying speed. A fever, swollen lymph nodes, blackened buboes beneath the arms and along the neck. Within days, sometimes hours, death. In crowded towns, Florence, Paris, London, the conditions are perfect. Waste in the streets, rats thriving in granaries and homes, fleas leaping from animal to human. Water sources contaminated, bodies weakened by malnutrition and hard labor. The medieval city is alive with commerce and prayer, but it is also a crucible. In Florence, chroniclers describe carts moving through narrow alleys, collecting the dead. In London, mass graves are dug beyond the city walls. Church bells toll so often that they blur into a single continuous note of mourning. And yet life does not stop. Women still need bread beside open hearths. Blacksmiths still hammer iron in smoky forges. Children still run through alleys, laughing, their bare feet splashing through puddles whose contents they do not understand. Markets still fill with traders, shouting prices over the buzzing of flies. There is beauty here, too. Candles flicker in stone chapels, illuminating stained glass that tells stories of hope and redemption. Monks copy manuscripts by hand, preserving knowledge in a world that feels as though it is unraveling. Families gather at long wooden tables, sharing coarse bread and thin ale, bound together by love and survival. But beneath it all lies a constant, unspoken truth. The body is vulnerable. Without sanitation, without antibiotics, without clean water systems, the simplest wound can become fatal. A minor cut, infected by dirt, can swell and blacken. Childbirth, so intimate, so sacred, is perilous. Nearly every family knows the ache of bearing a child. We speak today of inconvenience when the hot water runs cold. In 1348, inconvenience is walking half a mile to draw water, knowing it may already be fouled upstream. It is sleeping in the same room as livestock because their body heat helps you survive the winter. It is wearing the same tunic through summer heat, sweat drying and hardening into the fibers because you own no other rye. Hygiene is constrained by survival. And yet, within those constraints, there is ingenuity. Public bathhouses operate in some cities, remnants of Roman traditions, where men and women bathe in large wooden tubs. Herbal remedies are used to mask odor. Lavender, rosemary, sage. Vinegar is splashed onto skin in attempts to ward off disease. People are not indifferent, they are adapting. Still, the scale of suffering in 1348 is staggering. By some estimates, a third of Europe's population will die within a few years. Villages empty, fields go untilled, labor becomes scarce. Feudal bonds begin to strain and crack. Ironically, from the horror of filth and plague, change begins to stir. Survivors demand higher wages. Serfs leave estates in search of opportunity. Cities reconsider waste disposal. Slowly, painfully, societies begin to recognize that how they manage the body and its waste shapes the destiny of nations. The Middle Ages were not an age of darkness, as legend sometimes insists. They were an age of endurance. Imagine a mother in 1348 holding her child close in a small cottage that smells of smoke and sickness. She has no disinfectant, no thermomet. There, no understanding of microbes. She has only faith, instinct, and hope. She wipes her child's brow with a cloth dipped in cool water. She prays. She waits. Her courage is no less profound than any we celebrate today. When we speak of no showers, no toilet paper, we speak not merely of discomfort. We speak of a world where survival depended on muscle and prayer, where cleanliness was limited by physics and fuel, where the invisible enemies of disease move freely through crowded streets and cramped homes. We also speak of resilience. Because from those muddy streets and straw-filled beds rose cathedrals that still stand. From those plague-stricken towns emerged new economic systems, new questions about authority, new stirrings of humanism that would one day bloom into the Renaissance. The story of 1348 is not only about filth and fear. It is about humanity, fragile, stubborn, astonishing humanity, living without the conveniences we take for granted, yet forging meaning in the smoke and stench of daily life. So the next time warm water flows from a tap, the next time a light switch banishes darkness, the next time cleanliness feels ordinary, remember the year 1348. Remember the world without showers, without toilet paper, without the science that shields us now. And remember the people who endured it, not as caricatures of grime and ignorance, but as ancestors who, in the face of overwhelming hardship, continue to rise each morning, step into the muddy street, and live. If you found stillness in these words, subscribe to join this space of presence and share you deepest now in the comments below. Before the sun rises over a medieval village in 1348, a peasant household is already awake. The room is dark, lit only by the faint glow of embers that survive the night. Smoke clings to the rafters, the floor is packed earth, cold and uneven. There is no separate bedroom, no hallway, no tiled bathroom waiting at the end of a corridor. Life unfolds in a single shared space where cooking, sleeping, eating, and relieving oneself blur into one continuous rhythm. There is no shower to step into, no basin with running water. Water must be carried, lifted by hand from a well or hauled from a stream that may serve the entire village. It is heavy, and in winter it is painfully cold. Heating it requires time and wood is not endless. Fire is survival. Fire cooks food. Fire warms bodies. Fire hardens tools. To spend precious fuel heating water for a full bath is a luxury few can afford on a regular basis. Bathing, when it happens, is partial and practical. A cloth dipped in a wooden bowl. A quick wipe of the face, the hands, perhaps the neck. Dirt on the arms and legs remains, unless it becomes unbearable. Soap exists, but it is coarse, made from animal fat and ash, and often reserved for washing clothes rather than skin. The body carries the memory of labor, sweat dried into wool sleeves, grease warped into balm, soot embedded beneath fingernails. Clothing is both shield and burden. Wool tunics absorb moisture and odor. Linen undergarments, if owned at all, are few in number. Washing garments means another journey to the water source, scrubbing fabric against stone, wringing it out by hand, laying it across bushes or ropes to dry under uncertain skies. In damp weather, clothes never fully lose their smell. In winter, they freeze stiff before they dry. There is no toilet paper tucked discreetly away, no porcelain bowl, no flush. In modest homes, a bucket stands in a corner, sometimes shielded by a hanging cloth. The contents are emptied into a pit outside, or in towns, tossed into the street. In cities, narrow lanes collect the waste of hundreds. Rain becomes both cleanser and accomplice, washing refuse into gutters and water sources. In wealthier houses, there may be a privy built over a cesspit. In castles and manor houses, a garderobe, an opening in the stone wall, allows waste to drop into a moat or pit below. The design is practical, but the air is cold and the smell lingers. Privacy is thin. The sound of footsteps in the corridor reminds the occupant that walls are thick but not silent. Children grow up accustomed to this world. They run barefoot across ground layered with straw and mud. They learn early to step around refuse, to accept the presence of animals as constant companions. Pigs root through scraps, chickens scatter. Dogs curl near the hearth. Livestock often sleep under the same roof as humans, especially in winter, their body heat shared in a space already thick with smoke and breath. Water is never simply water. It may carry unseen dangers. Wells can be fouled. Streams may receive waste from upstream farms or households. Without knowledge of bacteria, contamination is judged by taste, smell, or superstition. Ale and weak beer are sometimes safer to drink than water, not because people understand fermentation as sterilization, but because experience has taught them what makes the stomach revolt and what does not. Hands are rarely washed with soap after every task. A farmer moves from field to table without ritual cleansing. A butcher wipes his blade on straw. A baker kneads dough with flour-dusted fingers that have handled coins and door latches. It is not negligence. It is not negligence. It is necessity. Time is measured by daylight and survival, not by invisible threats. The rhythm of bodily needs is shaped by environment. At night, stepping outside to relieve oneself can be dangerous. Cold, animals, even thieves. The bucket inside offers convenience, but at a cost to comfort. In towns, communal latrines line certain streets, shared by dozens. They are dark, damp, and buzzing with flies in warmer months. Maintenance is inconsistent. The concept of municipal sanitation exists in fragments, uneven and underfunded. And yet, within this harsh reality, there is order. Households sweep floors and spread fresh straw to absorb spills. Herbs are hung from rafters to sweeten the air. Lavender, rosemary, thyme. Vinegar is sprinkled in corners, not because people are indifferent to cleanliness, but because their tools are limited. Cleanliness is relative, defined by what can be seen and smelled. The human body adapts. Skin toughens. Noses become accustomed. Noses become accustomed. What would overwhelm a modern visitor becomes background to daily life. The scent of sweat mingles with smoke and livestock until it is simply the smell of home. Community narrows the distance between discomfort and acceptance. Everyone lives within the same boundaries. There is no comparison to a different standard, no advertisement promising freshness in a bottle. Markets intensify the sensory landscape. In a crowded town square, fish laid out on wooden tables begin to turn under the sun. Butchers' stalls drip onto the ground. Tanners cure hides in vats whose odors carry for streets. Yet commerce thrives. Voices rise above the hum of flies. Coins exchange hands. Bread changes owners. Life insists on continuing. Disease moves easily through such conditions.
Cuts fester.
Minor infections escalate. A cough in one corner of a cottage becomes a household affliction. Without regular bathing or sterilized tools, childbirth is perilous. Midwives rely on experience and prayer more than antiseptic tools. Midwives rely on experience and prayer more than antiseptic tools. A mother wipes her newborn with linen, wraps the child tightly in hopes that survival will be granted. To live in 1348 without showers and toilet paper is not simply to endure discomfort. It is to inhabit a world where the boundary between the body and the environment is thin. Mud clings to hems. Smoke settles into hair. Waste flows through streets. The senses are constantly engaged, sometimes assaulted, but always alert. Still, there are moments of care. A father washes his hands at a wooden bowl before holding his infant. A woman combs her daughter's hair, picking out lice one by one with patience and tenderness. A man scrapes mud from his boots before stepping inside. These small acts are gestures of dignity in a world without modern sanitation. Daily life is structured by repetition. Draw water, stoke fire, empty bucket, sweep straw, tend animals, prepare food. Each task intertwines with the reality of limited hygiene. There is no separation between cleanliness and labor. They are threads in the same fabric. The absence of plumbing does not mean the absence of effort. It means effort is constant, physical, visible. When we imagine the Middle Ages, it is tempting to reduce the experience to grime alone. But within that grime lived families who loved fiercely, who worried over their children's fevers, who laughed at the dinner table, who sought beauty in stained glass and song. They navigated a world without showers, not because they preferred it, but because history had not yet delivered the technologies we now consider basic. Their lives unfolded in close quarters and shared air heavy with smoke and humanity. Hygiene was shaped by geography, climate, class, and custom. Some bathed more frequently, others rarely. Some towns attempted regulations against dumping waste. Others struggled to enforce them. The story is not uniform, but it is intimate. It is the story of waking each day within the limits of one's era, of managing the body with what is available, of accepting that discomfort is ordinary and survival is achievement. It is the story of hands roughened by labor, of clothes stiff with dried sweat, of buckets carried through narrow lanes before dawn. It is the story of a society that had not yet discovered the microscopic world, yet moved through its days with determination, improvisation, and a stubborn insistence on living within the conditions it knew. If you found stillness in these words, subscribe to join this space of presence and share you deepest now in the comments below. The medieval town does not greet you gently. It meets you first with its smell. Before you see the timber-framed houses leaning toward one another across narrow lanes, before you hear the clang of a blacksmith's hammer or the murmur of market bargaining, you inhale it. The dense mixture of smoke, sweat, manure, rotting vegetables, stagnant water, and unwashed wool. It hangs in the air like a permanent fog, especially in summer, when heat draws every odor upward and presses it against the nostrils. In 1348, survival has a scent. The town is crowded beyond design. Houses are built close together. Upper stories jutting outward, nearly touching across the street. Windows are small. Ventilation is limited. Families live in tight quarters, parents, children, sometimes grandparents, sometimes apprentices, all breathing the same heavy air. Livestock are not distant figures in a field. They are neighbors. Pigs wander freely through lanes, rooting in refuse. Chickens scratch between doorways. Dogs nose through piles of scraps of waste. Waste disposal is an act of routine rather than infrastructure. Chamber pots are emptied into the street. Rain becomes the city's most reliable cleaner, carrying filth toward ditches and rivers that also serve as water sources. In dry weather, the refuse dries into crusted layers underfoot. In wet weather, it turns to a slick slurry that clings to boots and hems. Every sense is engaged in this landscape. Flies gather in clouds around butcher stalls. Fish laid out for sale begin to sour under the sun. Tanners soak hides in vat. S of urine and lime, their workshops radiating a stench so powerful that they are often pushed to the edges of town, though the wind carries their presence everywhere. Even the smoke from hearth fires, meant to warm and nourish, adds to the thick, acrid atmosphere. Inside homes, the air offers little relief. Fire is constant, used for cooking and warmth. Chimneys, where they exist, are inefficient. Smoke curls along beams and settles into thatched roofs. The scent of burning wood mixes with the smell of damp straw on the floor. Bedding is rarely fresh. Straw mattresses are changed when they can be, but insects thrive in their warmth. Fleas leap invisibly between fabric and flesh. In summer, heat intensifies everything. The narrowness of the streets traps warmth. Water stagnates in gutters, rot accelerates. Sweat beads on brows and soaks into wool garments that cannot be easily washed. In winter, cold offers some reprieve from decay but introduces its own hardships. Dampness seeps into walls. Mold creeps across corners. Wet clothing dries slowly, if at all, and carries the odor of mildew. Animals are not simply present, they are essential. A pig may represent a family's winter sustenance. A cow provides milk. Chickens offer eggs. To keep them close is practical. Their waste, however, accumulates quickly. Manure piles grow near doorways, sometimes deliberately stored for use as fertilizer, sometimes simply waiting for removal. The line between agricultural necessity and urban congestion blurs. The medieval street is alive with movement. Merchants shout their wares. Carters guide horses pulling wagons loaded with grain or timber. Children dart between adults. Beggars sit against walls. Monks pass in silent procession. Yet beneath this vitality lies a shared exposure. Every footstep stirs, dust laced with organic decay. Every breath carries particles from bodies in Bayo. It's alike. Waterways, which should symbolize purity, often reflect the town's burdens. Rivers and streams become conduits for waste. Dyers rinse colored cloth in them. Households dump refuse along their banks. Rain washes street debris into their currents. The same water may be drawn upstream for drinking, with little understanding of what flows unseen within it. The smell is not merely unpleasant, it shapes perception. Medieval people believe in miasma, the idea that foul air itself causes illness. In a world where odor and disease seem intertwined, the stench becomes a sign of danger. Herbs are burned or hung in homes to sweeten the air. Vinegar is splashed on floors. Flowers are carried in small posies. These acts are attempts to assert control over an environment that feels constantly on the edge of decay. Markets are the heart of town life, and also its most concentrated sensory experience. Fresh bread competes with the metallic scent of blood from freshly slaughtered animals. Spices imported from distant lands offer brief moments of exotic fragrance, sharp and sweet, cutting through the heavier odors. Crowds press together, bodies brushing in shared space. Personal distance is a luxury unknown. Overcrowding magnifies vulnerability. A single sick individual does not remain isolated for long. Homes share walls. Families share tools. Public wells draw entire neighborhoods together. In inns, travelers sleep in common rooms, side by side, their breaths mingling in darkness. Lice and fleas move easily from one host to another. The very closeness that fosters community also accelerates contagion. Sound and smell intertwine. The grunt of pigs, the clatter of hooves, the splash of discarded slops hitting the street below an open window. Laughter rises from taverns where ale flows, and men momentarily forget the burdens of labor. Bells toll from church towers, their psalm. Notes drifting across rooftops, heavy with soot. Even the countryside, often imagined as pure and open, carries its own intensity. Villages cluster around central paths churned by carts and animals. Fields fertilized with manure release their scent under the sun. Peasants labor long hours, sweat mixing with earth until the boundary between skin and soil feels indistinct. And yet, for those who live within it, this world is not defined solely by its odor. It is defined by familiarity. Children grow accustomed to it from birth. The smell of smoke signals warmth and food. The presence of animals signals sustenance. The hum of a crowded street signals opportunity. What might overwhelm an outsider becomes, for residents, the background note of existence. There are moments of respite. A breeze after rain clears the air briefly. Early morning before the market awakens offers a quieter atmosphere. A church interior. Thick stone walls muting the outside world carries the faint fragrance of wax and incense. A reminder that sacred space aspires to transcend the ordinary. But the ordinary always returns. Refuse accumulates again. Animals wander back. Fires are lit. Bodies labor and perspire. The cycle is relentless, shaped by necessity rather than choice. Shaped by necessity rather than choice. In 1348, as whispers of plague begin to spread, the town's crowded vitality takes on a new ominous dimension. The same density that once meant prosperity now suggests peril. Every cough echoes louder. Every unexplained fever casts suspicion on the air itself. People look at their streets, at the manure, the stagnant water, the piles of waste, and wonder whether the environment they have long endured has become their enemy. Yet even then, life continues in motion. Bakers knead dough before dawn. Smiths hammer iron into tools and horseshoes. Mothers call children in from play. The market fills once more. The smells remain layered and persistent, inseparable from the human drama unfolding within the timbered walls and narrow lanes. The Middle Ages were not lived in abstraction. They were lived in close quarters and shared air thick with the evidence of survival. The smell of the town was the smell of work, of animals, of fire, of waste, of food, of breath. It was the scent of humanity pressed together by architecture, economy, and necessity. Bound in a communal existence where every sense was engaged and every day required endurance within an environment that never allowed its presence to be ignored. If you found stillness in these words, subscribe to join this space of presence and share your deepest now in the comments below. In the year 1348, the rumors arrive before the ships do. Whispers drift along trade routes and across market squares of a sickness in distant ports, of entire households collapsing within days, of bodies marked by dark swellings and sudden fever. Merchants speak of it in low voices. Sailors make the sign of the cross. Priests preach repentance. At first, it feels like another tale carried on the wind, another hardship in an age familiar with suffering. Then the ships reach harbor. In places like Genoa and Venice, vessels slip into port bearing more than cargo. Some sailors are already dead when they arrive, their bodies stiff in the hull. Others stagger ashore fevered and delirious, with swollen lumps beneath their arms and along their necks. The docks, crowded with workers unloading grain and textiles, become silent witnesses to something no one yet understands. The towns of Europe in 1348 are primed for catastrophe. Streets are narrow and thick with refuse, houses are pressed tightly together. Waste flows through gutters into streams that serve as drinking water. Rats thrive in granaries and cellars, feeding on stored grain. Fleas ride invisibly. On their backs, leaping easily to human hosts, the disease moves quietly at first. A dock worker falls ill. A fishmonger develops a fever. A child in a crowded alley begins to cough. The symptoms are terrifying in their swiftness. High fever chills. Headache so severe it feels like a hammer against the skull. Then the buboes, dark, painful swellings that appear in the groin, underarms, and neck. Within days, sometimes within hours, death. Families watch in helpless disbelief. A father strong in the morning is delirious by night. A mother tending her sick child begins to feel the heat rising in her own body. There is no antibiotic, no understanding of bacteria, no concept of transmission through fleas and rats. Theories abound. Some blame poisoned wells, others blame divine wrath. Many believe the foul air of crowded cities, miasma, is itself the cause. In the cramped quarters of medieval towns, the disease finds fertile ground. Entire families sleep in one room, sharing straw mattresses. Breath mingles in the dark. Fleas move from blanket to skin. The very closeness that defines community becomes a pathway for death. Church bells toll constantly. At first, each ring marks a single passing soul. Soon, the sound becomes nearly continuous, a mournful chorus that blurs into the background of daily life. Graveyards fill quickly. Trenches are dug beyond city walls to hold the mounting dead. In some places, carts roll through streets, collecting bodies wrapped hastily in cloth. Fear spreads as fast as the illness. Neighbors avoid one another, doors are barred. Markets thin. Some flee the cities for the countryside, carrying the disease with them. Others remain trapped by poverty or duty. Physicians, dressed in long robes and sometimes wearing beaked masks stuffed with aromatic herbs, attempt treatments that range from bloodletting to burning incense. None can halt the tid. The Black Death does not discriminate by class, though wealth can delay exposure. Nobles retreat to country estates. Kings issue proclamations, yet even castles cannot fully shield their inhabitants. Servants fall ill. Supplies dwindle. The invisible enemy slips past walls and moats. In London, the dead are buried in mass graves at places like East Smithfield. In Florence, chroniclers describe streets emptied of laughter, houses abandoned with meals still on tables. In Paris, university scholars debate causes while cemeteries overflow. Across Europe, from Spain to Scandinavia, the pattern repeats: arrival, confusion, terror, loss. The scale is staggering. Within a few years, perhaps 1/3 of Europe's population is gone. Some villages vanish entirely, fields left untended, doors swinging open in the wind. Survivors move through landscapes marked by silence, church pews half empty, workshops abandoned, markets quieter than memory. For those who live through it, the emotional toll is as profound as the physical devastation. Children are orphaned. Parents bury sons and daughters. Clergy, once seen as intercessors with God, die alongside their congregations. Faith is shaken even as it is clung to more desperately than ever. Processions of penitents march through towns, whipping themselves in hopes of appeasing divine anger. Others search for scapegoats, turning suspicion and violence against marginalized communities. Daily life becomes a calculation of risk. To fetch water is to step into public space. To buy bread is to stand near strangers. To care for the sick is to court one's own death. Yet many do care. Nurses, family members, and priests remain beside the afflicted, holding hands slick with fever, whispering prayers into ears that may no longer hear. The disease reshapes the fabric of society. Labor becomes scarce. Fields cannot be harvested without hand. It's to work them. Wages rise for those who survive, unsettling the rigid hierarchies of feudal life. Lords attempt to freeze wages by law. Workers, newly aware of their value, resist. The plague becomes not only a biological catastrophe, but an economic and social turning point. In towns, authorities begin to recognize the need for change, even if they cannot yet grasp the scientific reasons. Some cities attempt rudimentary quarantine measures, isolating ships before allowing them to dock. Others pass ordinances about waste disposal and street cleaning. These efforts are uneven and often too late, but they mark the beginning of a new awareness that the organization of communal life influences survival. The Black Death leaves visible scars, fresh graves, empty houses, but also invisible ones. It alters how people see themselves and their world. Art begins to reflect mortality with stark realism. The Danse Macabre motif appears, depicting death as a universal companion, leading peasants and princes alike. Literature captures both despair and dark humor in the face of relentless loss. Yet even amid devastation, humanity persists. Markets reopen. Children are born. Churches hold services for smaller congregations. Survivors marry, inherit land, and rebuild. The same crowded streets that once amplified the spread of plague slowly fill again with the sounds of trade and conversation. The arrival of the Black Death in 1348 exposes the vulnerabilities of a world without modern sanitation or medical knowledge. It reveals how tightly woven communities can become conduits for catastrophe. It forces societies to confront the limits of their understanding and the fragility of their bodies. And in the shadow of unimaginable loss, life continues, altered, chastened, but unextinguished, moving forward through streets once choked with fear, through homes that have known too much sile. Nence, through fields where new hands began again to sow, and reap, carrying with them the memory of a year when death walked openly among the living and changed the course of history forever. In 1348, when sickness begins to sweep across Europe with terrifying speed, people search desperately for explanations. The human mind cannot endure chaos without meaning. When fathers collapse in the fields and mothers burn with fever in crowded cottages, when children who were laughing days before now lie silent beneath rough linen cloths, the question rises from every village and every city street: why? The answers available are shaped by centuries of belief. Medicine in the Middle Ages rests largely on the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health is understood as balance among these fluids. Disease is imbalance. A fever suggests excess heat. A swelling implies corruption within. Physicians trained in university towns consult ancient authorities like Galen and Hippocrates, whose writings have endured through generations. They examine urine in glass flasks, studying its color and sediment. They feel pulses. They prescribe diets, purges, and bloodletting to restore harmony within the body. When the plague symptoms appear, sudden fever, vomiting, dark swellings beneath the skin, doctors interpret them through this familiar lens. The body must be overheated, they reason. The blood must be tainted. Leeches are applied, veins are opened. Patients are instructed to avoid certain foods and to inhale pleasant scents to counteract internal corruption. Vinegar is recommended for washing. Vinegar is recommended for washing. Fires are lit to cleanse the air, but the disease moves too quickly, too ruthlessly for these measures to succeed. Alongside humoral theory stands another powerful explanation: miasma. The belief that foul air itself carries illness has deep roots. In towns where waste collects in gutters and animal carcasses rot near market stalls, it seems logical that stench and sickness are intertwined. When the Black Death spreads through crowded cities thick with smoke and decay, the theory feels confirmed. And decay, the theory feels confirmed. People begin to focus on air. Windows are open to let in breezes. Incense burns in churches and homes. Herbs, lavender, rosemary, sage are carried in small bundles to mask unpleasant smells. Physicians sometimes wear long robes and masks with beak-like noses filled with aromatic substances, believing that filtering the air will protect them from harm. The effort is sincere, even compassionate, but it cannot see the true agents at work: the fleas riding rats, the bacteria moving invisibly from host to host. For many, however, the ultimate explanation lies not in humors or in air, but in heaven. The 14th century is an age of deep faith. God's presence is woven into daily life. Harvests, storms, victories, and illnesses are all interpreted through a spiritual framework. When plague devastates entire towns, it is natural to see it as divine punishment. Sermons thunder with warnings of sin. Priests call for repentance. Churches fill with worshipers seeking mercy. Some respond with quiet prayer and fasting. Others join dramatic public displays of penance. Groups known as flagellants travel from town to town, whipping themselves in the streets to atone for collective wrongdoing. They chant hymns and call upon God to lift his wrath. Crowds gather to watch, moved by fear and fervor. The spectacle is both desperate and deeply human, a community attempting to wrest control from catastrophe through visible acts of devotion. Yet faith does not always lead to unity. In times of fear, suspicion grows. If God is punishing, someone must be responsible. Minority communities, especially Jewish populations in certain accusations of whale poisoning spread. Violence erupts in some towns, fueled by terror and misunderstanding. The tragedy of disease is compounded by the tragedy of persecution. Medicine and religion intertwine in complex ways. Many physicians are also clerics. Hospitals, often attached to monasteries, serve both the sick and the poor. Monks and nuns care for the afflicted, tending wounds and offering comfort, even as they risk infection themselves. Their knowledge is limited by the science of their time, but their dedication is profound. They hold hands, whisper prayers, wipe brows damp with fever. Astrology adds another layer to explanation. The alignment of planets is believed to influence earthly events. When plague strikes, some scholars look to the skies. Conjunctions of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars are cited as cosmic causes, their positions interpreted as signs of imbalance in the universe. Charts are drawn, predictions are debated. The heavens become a mirror in which earthly suffering seeks reflection. In households, remedies are improvised. Garlic is hung above doors. Potions are brewed from herbs and roots. Some families isolate the sick in back rooms, though the concept of contagion is imperfectly understood. Others cling more tightly to one another, unwilling to let loved ones die alone. There is no clear guidance, no authoritative cure. Advice shifts from town to town, from healer to healer. The absence of germ theory shapes every response. The idea that invisible organisms cause disease lies centuries in the future. Without microscopes or scientific experimentation as we know it, knowledge is inherited rather than tested. Tradition carries weight. Authority rests in ancient texts and respected teachers. Questioning these foundations is rare and often discouraged. And yet, even within these limits, there are sparks of observation. Some communities notice that those who handle the dead fall ill more frequently. A few port cities experiment with isolating ships before allowing passengers to disembark. These early forms of quarantine are born not from full understanding, but from pattern recognition, from a cautious attempt to interrupt the chain of disaster. For the ordinary person in 1348, however, explanations remain deeply personal. A mother may see her child's illness as a trial sent by God. A merchant may believe the foul air of the marketplace is to blame. A physician may insist that an excess of black bile has corrupted the blood. These interpretations coexist, overlapping in a world where science, faith, and folklore are not sharply divided. The emotional weight of misunderstanding is immense. To face a disease without knowing its source is to live in constant uncertainty. Every breeze could carry danger. Every neighbor could be a threat. Every sin could be fatal. Fear seeps into daily life, shaping behavior and belief. Yet within that fear is also resilience. Communities gather for prayer even as pews empty. Healers continue their rounds, armed with the best knowledge available to them. Families light candles beside beds of the sick. The search for meaning becomes a form of endurance, a way to assert that suffering, however vast, is not random. The plague exposes the limits of medieval knowledge, but it also reveals the depth of human yearning to understand. In the absence of microscopes and laboratories, people turn to the tools they possess: scripture, tradition, observation, ritual. They seek patterns in the sky, in the air, in the body's fluids. They attempt to impose order on chaos, to frame disaster within narratives that offer at least the comfort of explanation. In this world of humors and miasma, of prayer and penance, of charts drawn under candlelight and herbs crushed between fingers, the struggle against the Black Death becomes not only a battle against disease, but a confrontation with the boundaries of belief, where medicine, religion, and misunderstanding collide in the shadow of a mortality no theory can yet fully grasp. It does not leave behind the world it found. It leaves something altered, thinner, quieter, shaken to its foundations. Entire villages stand half empty, fields lie unplowed, weeds creeping through furrows once cut by steady hands. Church pews hold fewer worshipers. Workshops echo where apprentices once learned their craft. The air, once thick with fear and the scent of death, carries a fragile stillness, and yet life persists. Those who survive step into a landscape reshaped by absence. Those who survive step into a landscape reshaped by absence. A young farmhand who once labored under the command of a lord now finds that there are fewer laborers to command. Wages, once fixed and low, begin to rise. Landowners compete for workers. Bargaining power shifts in subtle but profound ways. The rigid structure of feudal obligation begins to strain under the weight of demographic collapse. In England, statutes are issued in attempts to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. Authorities fear disorder, fear that peasants emboldened by scarcity of labor will demand too much. But enforcement proves difficult. The reality is undeniable. Without hands to sow and reap, estates cannot function. Survivors move from village to village, seeking better terms. The old assumptions about hierarchy tremble. In towns, guilds that once limited entry to protect their members face new challenges. Skilled craftsmen have died. Positions stand vacant. Opportunities open for those previously shut out. A weaver's son may find himself inheriting tools and customers. A widow may take over her husband's shop, stepping into a role once close to her. The plague, indifferent in its destruction, as in it did, urgently widened narrow paths. There is grief woven into every gain. Prosperity, when it comes, is built upon graves. Families inherit land, not because of fortune, but because of loss. Children grow up without parents. Parents bury sons and daughters. The emotional landscape is scarred, even as the economic one shifts. The church, too, is transformed. Many priests and monks have died tending the sick. Their absence creates shortages of spiritual leadership. New clergy are ordained quickly, sometimes with less training than their predecessors. Faith remains central, but questions linger. If God allowed such devastation, what does that mean for divine protection? Some cling more tightly to belief, others quietly doubt. Art begins to reflect this altered consciousness. Images of death become more vivid, more personal. Skeletons dance alongside kings and peasants in frescoes and manuscripts, reminding viewers that mortality spares no rank. Literature captures both despair and dark wit, acknowledging the fragility of life. The experience of mass death seeps into culture, shaping imagination for generations. In rural communities, abandoned land sometimes reverts to pasture. Forest edges creep outward. Wildlife returns to areas once heavily cultivated. The balance between human settlement and nature shifts subtly. Survivors observe these changes with a mixture of unease and opportunity. Fewer mouths to feed can mean more food per household, but it also means fewer neighbors, fewer familiar faces at market and church. Resilience reveals itself in ordinary acts. A farmer repairs a broken fence, determined to plant again. A mason rebuilds a crumbling wall. A mother teaches her child to read from a cherished manuscript, believing that knowledge must endure even when bodies do not. These gestures, small and unremarkable in isolation, accumulate into renewal. Communities adapt. Their practices. Some towns strengthen early forms of quarantine, isolating ships or travelers during outbreaks of illness. Waste disposal regulations become more intentional in certain regions. While the science of germs remains unknown, the memory of plague fosters caution. Experience becomes a teacher where theory once failed. The social fabric, though torn, does not unravel completely. Marriages increase as survivors seek companionship and stability. Birth rates rise in some areas in instinctive response to loss. Laughter returns to marketplaces. Festivals resume, perhaps more subdued at first, then with growing confidence. Life insists on itself, even in the shadow of memory. The concept of time itself feels altered. Those who lived through 1348 measure years as before and after. Stories of the plague are told to children who did not witness it, shaping their understanding of vulnerability and endurance. The event becomes a reference point, a shared trauma that binds generations. Economic shifts ripple outward. With labor scarce, innovation gains incentive. Tools are improved. Agricultural methods are reconsidered. The value of human effort becomes more visible when it is in short supply. The relationship between lord and serf begins to evolve, sometimes contentiously, sometimes gradually. Seeds of social change planted in the soil of catastrophe begin to germinate. Urban centers, though diminished, regain momentum. Trade routes reopen. Merchants return to ports. The memory of deserted streets fades slowly as new faces fill them. Yet beneath the renewed activity lies an awareness of impermanence. The plague has demonstrated that prosperity can vanish swiftly, that crowded vitality can become deadly vulnerability. There is also a shift in perspective, a heightened consciousness of the individual. When so many have died, each surviving life feels weightier. Personal piety deepens for some. Others seek pleasure more openly, determined to savor what can be taken in the present. The balance between caution and boldness becomes part of the cultural inheritance. Resilience in the face of filth and fear is not dramatic heroism alone. It is the quiet decision to plant crops in a field where neighbors once stood. It is the choice to rebuild a burned cottage. It is the willingness to trust again, to marry again, to bring children into a world that has proven its fragility. The plague does not usher in immediate enlightenment or erase suffering. Poverty persists. Sanitation remains limited. Future outbreaks will come, but the memory of 1348 lingers as both warning and catalyst. It exposes weaknesses in social structures and compels gradual adaptation. It humbles rulers and commoners alike. From the mud of medieval streets, from the straw-strewn floors of cottages, from the mass graves beyond city walls, a new chapter begins to take shape. Survivors carry scars, physical, emotional, spiritual, but they also carry experience. They have witnessed the collapse of certainty and endured it. They have buried their dead and continued to breathe. In that persistence lies the truest measure of resilience. Not the absence of suffering, but the refusal to surrender to it. Not the denial of fear, but the courage to move forward despite it. In the years after 1348, Europe is smaller in number yet larger in possibility, reshaped by loss yet propelled by the determination of those who remain to rebuild, to renegotiate their place in society, to carve meaning from memory, and to live within a world forever marked by the year when death came uninvited and humanity, though battered, endured. If you found stillness in these words, subscribe to join this space of presence and share you deepest now in the comments below. Subcrips, thanks for watching this video, and don't forget to like and Dan.